attention just how complex this issue is. So I've only got a couple slides, but I'll warn you in advance that one of them is kind of a doozy. So just stick with me here, and you'll hopefully come away with a better understanding. And I see we do still have some glare coming off of this window. Gail, if you could help me out over there, maybe just pull those blinds. There are a variety of water quality related issues that we are needing to address. And there are various people out there who say, well, just focus on this or just focus on that. And I'm here to tell you we can't just focus on one thing. We've got to look at the big picture, or else we're never going to solve the problem. So many of you have probably seen this slide in the past. It tries to make things pretty simple. On the left there, pre-drainage flow, what the whole Everglades system looked like, all the way going up to the present-day Orlando area. The pre-drainage situation. The middle slide showing how we're dealing with things right now with the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie estuary, getting those massive discharges, and ultimately what those restored flows. This is post-SERP, what's going to happen there. And you see there are still blue lines coming out there. We're going to continue, even with all of the SERP projects getting completed, there would still be discharges coming out the St. Lucie and the Caloosahatchee. That makes it look pretty simple, though. Past, current, what's going to happen? Well, I'll tell you, it gets very complicated. Very complicated. And I'm not going to walk you through this one, but this is just from last week, one of the weekly updates that's done by the various regulatory agencies, the South Florida Water Management District and the Corps of Engineers and their cadre of scientists and meteorologists and everything else. And what they're looking at is the water budget for the whole system. Where is the water coming from? What's the volume that's going out in different locations? And as Maggie or one of the previous speakers mentioned, this year the various agencies are doing a good job at now trying to shunt some of that water off so that we don't continue to get blasted. So this one is very complicated. We're not going to walk through it, but just let me assure you that there are the top people in the field looking at this on an ongoing basis, trying to figure out how we can deal with overall our problem of not having enough water storage in the whole system. So what I'm going to do is kind of build on what is indeed a puzzle. How do you put all this together? So take a look at that picture on the left there, and I'm going to hope all my graphics work out here. You've really put me to the challenge here of my computer capabilities, but we're going to open up this puzzle box that is the St. Lucie River and the southern IRL right now in its deteriorated condition of all of that black water. Let's open up that puzzle box, and we're going to, if any of you are jigsaw puzzle people, just work through this with me. We're going to take a look at all the various issues that need to be considered with all this. I'm going to run them down on the left-hand side, and I'm sorry I had to keep making the font smaller and smaller because there are so many complicated things. But we're going to start off with the Hoover Dike. The Hoover Dike right now, and its rehabilitation by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, is a big limitation to us. So look at the dike there, and we are aware that the Corps of Engineers is bulking up that dike, and overall we think that that's probably a good thing. We have concerns about that because indeed if it then gets managed even more so as a reservoir for the various agricultural interests, then it could indeed become a problem. And that's really how many of these things I'm going to put up here are. They could be good, they could be bad, but we have to acknowledge them for what they are. So Hoover Dike, and actually Lake Okeechobee, the whole way the lake is regulated is through what they call LORS, the Lake Okeechobee Regulation Schedule. It's this complicated process that takes into consideration what the discharges are going to do at various locations, what's the threat to the dike itself, is it going to fail, and are there going to be homes flooded out south of the lake, all that sort of thing. So the Lake Okeechobee Regulation Schedule to us and our estuaries is a key piece of the puzzle. Let's now look at SERP projects. Maggie and others know a lot more of the history on all of the different SERP projects, but we've got to recognize that many years ago, this is a series of projects that were intended to indeed, once implemented, really restore the Everglades. So these pieces of the puzzle are way down there in Everglades National Park. So there are several different pieces, but ultimately the goal is to restore Everglades National Park. So we'll continue from there, because one of those components that's gotten a lot of public attention over the last couple of years, I think Joan Bausch was instrumental in letting us all understand, helping us to understand the CEP project. So this is the Central Everglades Planning Project, and you see that red piece of the puzzle, kind of the southeastern part of the water catchment areas. It's kind of an internal series of engineering solutions to try to allow more water to flow south. It doesn't have anything to do with the Everglades agricultural area, but the idea is that by making these adjustments, putting in some levees, taking out some levees, putting in some control structures, one thing or another, the bottom line is we'll be able to shunt more water to the south. And what that means to us is, the figure that I've heard is, it will take about 12% of the water that would otherwise be coming out the St. Lucie estuary is now going to be able to go south. So that's good, but 12% isn't too much. A big component of the pieces of the puzzle for us are the Kissimmee River and the chain of lakes. Starting way up at the present day, southern Orlando and the Disney World area, and the whole Kissimmee watershed. And indeed, the federal government is taking the lead on restoring the Kissimmee River. If any of you have not been out, I encourage you to go out on the pontoon boat trip out there at Riverwoods. They'll take you up a meandering portion of the river. Now, they'll take you up in the straightened portion that we're now trying to restore, and they'll bring you back on the circuitous oxbows that have been put back in. It's a great example of what's happening. But we've got to recognize right now the federal government's funding for that is just a relatively small component of the whole project. It's going to take many years to go through it. So we're going to keep taking pieces of the puzzle out of the puzzle box, and we're going to put them on as they pertain to this whole long laundry list. So the next issue is storage north of Lake Okeechobee. And I'll have to say that that's one that I'm particularly interested in, because a key issue, as far as I'm concerned, is we've got to get more storage to the north of the lake. So many of those properties are overdrained. They're agricultural lands where, in order to do the agriculture, whatever's there, whether it's actually growing crops or citrus or cattle, whatever it is, the water table is artificially lowered. So it's controversial, yes. Why should we have to pay these agricultural owners to keep the water on their property that they really should have been doing all along? But the reality of it is, if we want to keep more water out of our estuary, we've got to push for more storage north of the lake. So the way we're doing that is the federal government and the state government, kind of the consortium here, is trying to come up with money, and some of this, I guess, is Amendment 1 money that may be used to pay for these hydrologic restoration projects. All north of the lake, the idea, keep that water up there, let it percolate down instead of coming straight down the river into Lake Okeechobee. An issue that many of us have some concerns about, but it's part of the overall SERP project, is aquifer storage and recovery. This is the whole business of taking excess water when it is available, pumping it underground into a specific geologic structure where hopefully then that water can be pulled out in times when when it wouldn't hurt the estuaries and everything else to do so. There are dozens of these, or maybe hundreds, 300 ASR wells. Controversial, but it certainly is an element to trying to keep the water out of our estuaries. Most of those are around Lake Okeechobee, so I've just brought in the puzzle piece for that. A key issue, and I can't really put a location on a map other than the home base for the South Florida Water Management District down there in Palm Beach County. They're very instrumental in all of this. They have the key scientists who are allocating what sort of water goes where. We've got to continue to work with what we've got there, recognizing that Those governing board members are political appointees. We can't oust them if we don't like what they're doing. It's a political situation. Let's next talk about the C-44. Most of you know the St. Lucie Canal. There's a big project going on, a federal government project right now, in partnership with the money that many of us as taxpayers have put into acquiring the land. The C-44 project is under construction right now. It's going to take a lot of the water, both some out of the St. Lucie Canal, but mostly out of our own watershed to try to clean that water up. Associated with the C-44 are these internal canal systems along the east coast here, generally marked in St. Lucie County, the C-23 and the C-24. Both of these are big drainage basins that are sending water further to the east. The more water that we can hold back and not have it discharging right out, in this case through the North Fork of the St. Lucie or up through Taylor Creek into Fort Pierce, the better our water quality will be. Local governments are a big key to this, and I thank those commissioners that are here for going to bat for all the various things that we're doing, whether it is the fertilizer ordinances, the various growth management, our comp plan, a big key feature. But as we go up the coast there, Martin, St. Lucie, Indian River, Brevard, and even into Volusia County, because those folks are still fronting the IRL and are part of this Indian River Lagoon Council that Ed Fielding is so admirably chairing. Big issue to the local governments, not just here in Martin, but to the others as well, is septic to sewer conversions. Martin County just completed this study within the last month or two, showing what a large contribution groundwater is into water quality in the St. Lucie and the IRL. Well, the other counties are having this problem as well. We've all got to figure out how to come up with some funds to try to deal with that. Fertilizer ordinances as well. Many of the municipalities, well, the counties have adopted them. The municipalities have been loath to do so far. So somehow we've got to do a better job at integrating those municipalities into the bigger picture. The C-43, not so much of an issue on our side, but it's the waterway that takes water from Lake Okeechobee out to the west. And so you're going to see building blocks or puzzle pieces here going westerly along the C-43 and out through the Caloosahatchee River into the Fort Myers area. When I saw the information, you probably saw it too, there's recently the South Florida Water Management District allocated many millions, I've forgotten exactly what it was, 10 million or something like that, towards the construction of a reservoir along the C-43. So it's all a piece of the pie, very, very definitely. Dispersed water management is one of these issues that is very difficult, but essentially paying some of those farmers to increase the water table on their property. Controversial, yes, because they're using our tax monies to do so, and it's in a situation where it's a short-term sort of a fix. Some of these leases are for 10 years or so, and so there's a short-term benefit, but in the long term, we have no guarantee for any long-lasting impacts. So yes, Everglades agricultural area, big issue for us. Essentially, why can't we flow the water south? Well, right there south of the lake, there are sugar cane lands over several hundred to 800,000 acres or so, something like that. 400,000, okay, thanks, Don. That are really in the way of trying to send that water south. So there are, we've got to recognize that how we have wanted to do it in the recent number of years does not have any political traction, and so there are efforts by a number of entities to try to figure out how we can essentially bypass the heart of the EAA, but still flow the water south. Very complicated issue that we're not going to solve today, but we got to recognize that it's a part of the puzzle, a big part.
Um,
Governor Scott last year, I think, made a big, big push to try to get the water south. Well, right there south of the lake, there are sugar cane lands over several hundred to 800,000 acres or so, something like that. 400,000, okay, thanks, Don. That are really in the way of trying to send that water south. So there are, we've got to recognize that how we have wanted to do it in the recent number of years does not have any political traction, and so there are efforts by a number of entities to try to figure out how we can essentially bypass the heart of the EAA, but still flow the water south. Very complicated issue that we're not going to solve today, but we got to recognize that it's a part of the puzzle. A big part. press release photo op of taking out a couple of the bridges or increasing the flow under Tamiami Trail. Well, it's certainly a good thing. What we've got to recognize is that water quality is a key to all this. We can't be pushing for additional flow that would then require that the water quality standards be not met. You know, there are a couple of issues here that are going on simultaneously. Yes, the Everglades need water, but they don't need water that is of an inappropriate quality. Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands are another issue down there in Miami-Dade County that are a funding issue, but trying to restore some of those wetlands down there in the southern part of the state. So our puzzle box is emptying here. I don't want to leave out the IRL Council by any means, because Ed Fielding's work there and bringing those counties together, I think is very definitely making progress with trying to deal with the problems that we are all facing. Yes, it's a completely different water quality issue up there in Brevard County, but if there are indeed ways, I think their motto is that the lagoon makes us all neighbors. And so it's a good way for us to all be working together. So we're going to go right up the counties there, Martin, St. Lucie, Indian River, and Brevard counties all playing, and Volusia County all playing a part in that whole program. Yes, there are people who will tell us that one little bird, and I'm a bird person overall, that one little bird is causing us all kinds of problems. And yes, there is this endangered Cape Sable seaside sparrow way down there at the very southern tip. Not too many of those birds left, and they have evolved to nest on the ground, and if we flood them out, we do away with that population. We've got to acknowledge that we don't want to be pushing anybody into violating the Endangered Species Act through that, so it's just an issue that is a piece of the puzzle. We're not going to wipe it out. We've got to consider what's going on and look out for their long-term good. Florida Bay is one down there at the very southern end, is the entity that is suffering because of the lack of water and a variety of other problems, so that's another piece of the puzzle as well. Competition with other water quality needs. I spoke to the Conservation Alliance here a couple months ago about overall statewide water quality issues. We've got to recognize that, yes, indeed, there are springs in North Florida that are in horrendous condition. We've got to acknowledge that our colleagues, and Ryan can probably speak to this on water quality issues statewide, those folks, they need help. And so there is competition. There's a limited amount of money up there in Tallahassee that they're going to allocate for environmental issues. We're going to have to be patient, but a lot of those are up in North Florida, and they are very real problems. Along the West Coast, I've got several pieces of the puzzle coming in there, generally along the Tampa area and further south, because we've got situations over there where those folks are having their own red tide all along the coast. There is a weekly update that provides information about how toxic the water is. You can't be going in the water. The kinds of things that we complain about here, well, they're essentially standard situation along the West Coast. So it's a problem that is indeed a piece of the puzzle when we're looking at trying to fund these kind of water quality projects. So I'm getting down to the bottom of what I've got room for. We're going to talk about Tallahassee just a little bit. The governor's office is certainly a big challenge to us on water quality issues. The legislators also, and Ryan I'm sure is going to speak to Amendment 1 monies in the current initiative to try to get some of that money going for long-term land acquisition and water quality kinds of projects. Right now, I'd say they are a very big piece of the puzzle that we're having a hard time with. And associated with that, I've got the puzzle piece up there for DEP. I've got them based up in Tallahassee because that's where a lot of the decision makers go or issue their edicts. I was pleased that the Guardians let me spend some time on analyzing a big 316 study, I think it was called, where the state of Florida wanted to know what to do with this excess water. Well, the legislators they wanted to know, what do we do with this excess water? Their answers through this huge study was relax water quality standards, allow us to pump more water underground, essentially legitimatize what we're currently doing. And so the Guardian sent off a several-page letter saying, absolutely not. We do not condone reducing water quality standards. It's exactly the water quality standards that aren't strong enough that have led us into this problem, whether it's the St. Lucie or the West Coast or the Springs. So in the big picture, we need to look at other opportunities to try to improve water quality standards. You know, the whole thing about the rising tide lifts all boats. We could solve a lot of these problems if we could improve the water quality standards. Yes, pre versus post, but also the standards themselves. What are the amounts of nutrients and heavy metals and all this sort of stuff that is either acceptable or unacceptable? So on one hand, you might think, well, let's improve those standards and the whole state will improve. But what we've got to acknowledge, the political realities are that is that going to happen? Absolutely not. So essentially all that is going to go away. And so we're stuck with a big piece of the puzzle being that unless we exert some political influence, we're going to not be able to get improved water quality standards or anything like that. So just to summarize here, how can we stop polluting our estuaries? Yes, we need to complete those CERT projects. I'll go along with everybody who says, let's complete them, but we've got to recognize that that is just a piece of the pie. More storage of water north of the lake is very definitely important to us. Land acquisition south of the lake, well, north of the lake as well, but those are both pieces of the pie. We've got to recognize that the land acquisition is only just a part of it. We've got to, unfortunately, I don't like deep, mucky reservoirs, but we need to have some of that to store some of the water, but we need to be pushing for the STAs as well so that that water is cleaned up. Eliminating fecal coliform inputs into the St. Lucie estuary and the IRL. Very definitely, we've recognized that that's a problem, and we appreciate Martin County's looking into essentially prioritizing areas within our own county that are providing those inputs and trying to figure out a way to deal with them on sort of a priority by priority basis. The state has this program for what they call BMAPs, Basin Management Action Plans, and so we've got to acknowledge that those are going to be helpful, but in the DEP vernacular of how they do all this, they have pushed out the targets for, I don't know, a decade or more. So they're a piece of the pie, but we've got to push for more than that. I personally think we need to revisit these water quality standards. I guess I shouldn't have limited it to water quality. We need to deal with water quantity as well. I mean, we've been seeing in the news over the last several days the problems in Louisiana and other places. We hear increasingly in Florida, this is a 1 in 100-year storm. Well, we've got to recognize what's happening there is the volume of rain may not be all that much different than in the past, but what's happening as more wetlands are destroyed and more surfaces are becoming impermeable, that same amount of water is causing higher and higher flooding events. So it's a big problem nationwide. We can only hope that in the big picture, the federal government might come to our aid in all that, because they don't want FEMA and everybody else to keep paying out money to people to rebuild in the same locations that are going to get flooded out again. I'm very interested in promoting these living shorelines, whether it is for the long-term health of the offshore reefs or our estuaries alone. The work that the Nature Conservancy and others are doing to try to promote no more seawalls, but putting in riprap and the oyster bags and mangroves and all that sort of thing. If we're providing more habitat, we're doing a better thing for the fisheries overall. And I'm going to end with electing responsible politicians. We thank those of you who are here. If we had more like you, we wouldn't be in the problems that we've got right now. Thank you.